Denis Villeneuve's Dune has finally arrived in theatres, and there's a lot to break down in the auteur filmmaker's latest film. It's the beginning of a much deeper story that adapts the first half of Frank Herbert's seminal novel, with the director recently stating that if part 1 and part 2 go down well, then we could even be in store for a trilogy of films. I'm going to be breaking down the plot and explaining the ending and story details that take place on the worlds of Caladan and Arrakis in Dune Part 1 to help you guys put together a much greater picture of the Dune universe. This video will be especially useful for those who haven't read the book, but for those who have, it will also be of great use for comparison to the events of the novel. I will also be making much more content with those who are familiar with the source material in mind, so buckle up and take all the spice you can get your hands on, because the next few weeks on my channel will be full of Dune content. But as a last warning, this analysis will contain spoilers, so if you do happen to be someone who hasn't seen the film yet, then I would recommend watching this video after you've seen it. But if you want to keep up to date on all of my Dune videos coming over the next few weeks, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating, subscribing to the channel, and turning on your notifications. Also, feel free to check me out on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Instagram at Cortex Videos, which is all linked in the description below. But without further ado, let's dive into Denis Villeneuve's Dune Explained. So Dune tells the story of warring houses not on a planet, but in space. At the centre of the conflict is the resource melange, or spice, only found on the desert planet Arrakis, also known as Dune, which enables faster-than-light space travel. But as we're shown in the film, it also has hallucinogenic effects, which probably accounts for the demand. House Harkonnen had heavily ruled Dune for years, and this had led them to the ongoing conflict with the blue-eyed Fremen natives. And upon the Emperor's sudden decree, rival House Atreides is now charged with the responsibility of administering the planet that House Harkonnen is now forced to give up, along with the spice they so desire. The viewer learns all of this straight from the get-go, alongside a good amount of foreshadowing that gives us the impression that the responsibility that House Atreides has accepted is a poisoned one. Compared to the brutal rule of House Harkonnen, and in particular Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, House Atreides, led by Duke Leto Atreides, who is played by Oscar Isaac, is a positive step in the right direction. Accompanied by his concubine Lady Jessica, played by Rebecca Ferguson, and their grown son Paul Atreides, played by Timothée Chalamet, we see the values of this house are in stark contrast with how House Harkonnen operates, especially when managing relations with the native Fremen. Little exposition is made, and audiences from the get-go know which side they should be rooting for, even if this becomes more interesting with more installments. In particular, we are presented with a clear view of good versus evil over the precious spice in the first part of Dune, and very little in between. Power in the galaxy is a three-way balancing act between the Spacing Guild, who hold a monopoly on faster-than-light travel, the Padishah Emperor, who controls a fanatical army of Sardaukar, and a system of alliances between noble houses. The invisible fourth pillar of this structure is the Bene Gesserit order, which again is something that will become more clear later down the line for non-book readers. What we do learn though is that the all-female witches are pulling a lot of strings. But the film's opening narration comes from Chani, played by Zendaya, not Princess Irulan as in both the books and David Lynch's previous adaptation of Dune. In said narration, Chani details the oppression of the Fremen by House Harkonnen and its servants, ending her speech by ominously saying, "Who will be our new oppressors?" This serves to broaden the perspective of Villeneuve's film beyond House Atreides. Chani describes the spice and how it's mined on Arrakis, and we see Raban, played by Dave Bautista, wielding a whip, as well as the Fremen sabotaging a Harkonnen spice harvester. In other words, the film opens by establishing the conflict between the native Fremen and the Harkonnens, their appointed imperial oppressors, additionally making it clear why House Atreides is summoned to Arrakis. But we then begin to see this all come into motion as the first of Paul's dreams of Arrakis plays out, and that of Chani. These dreams, to begin with, are brief and more to establish that Chani's character, who is an important Fremen, will be relevant as the story progresses. But it introduces Paul's visions to us and tells us right from the beginning that these are only going to escalate and become more vivid once, of course, he combines it with a dose of hallucinating spice. But Paul wakes up and we then are introduced to his home, the planet Caladan. In contrast to the sandy Arrakis, Caladan is an oceanic world with a large agricultural industry. The planet is ruled entirely by the great house of Atreides and has been for dozens of generations. At the start of Dune, it is under the control of Duke Leto Atreides. However, the family is forced to give up their home for Arrakis, leaving it under the control of Count Fenring. Duke Leto, Lady Jessica, Gurney Halleck, played by Josh Brolin, and Paul greets a herald from Emperor Shaddam IV, who asks whether House Atreides will assume command of spice harvesting operations on Arrakis. Duke Leto agrees in tradition with his house, and notably, as the novel opens, House Atreides had already been appointed to this position on Arrakis, making this scene in the film a major alteration that's specific to Villeneuve's vision. But it does work here in the midst of world and story building that takes place during the early Caladan scenes. And alongside political matters, we get some well-needed development of our main character Paul and where he could be going. After listening to tapes about Arrakis, the Fremen, and the much valuable spice, he has breakfast with his mother, Lady Jessica, who is a part of the Bene Gesserit, and we learn that she has been training him in the way. In this scene, she tries to teach him the voice, where we see him try to summon a cup to drink. In the world of Dune, the voice is analogous to a Jedi mind trick in that it serves as a form of mind control. His attempt to use the voice here does fail, however, but the sound effect utilised to portray it is noteworthy because we hear it later on in the film to signal its usage. The first act also gives us the much famous box of pain scene, and we really start to see the influence of the Bene Gesserit and what Paul's dreams could actually mean. We already learned prior to this that Paul told Jason Momoa's Duncan Idaho that he saw a vision of him dying in battle before he travels to Arrakis, but now it's time for him to finally address these visions with a Bene Gesserit witch. Like we see in the trailer, when Chalamet's Paul places his hand inside it, it allows the person holding the box, in this case the Reverend Mother, to focus their energy into creating a sensation of incredible pain. The Bene Gesserit Sisterhood is an ancient society of women openly dedicated to shaping the destiny of humanity through political power and eugenics. They're particularly interested in Paul because of how his existence throws a wrench into their 1,000-year plan to breed their own messiah, and we learn this quite clearly in the conversation between Jessica and the Reverend Mother following the test. But the witch's appraisal comes in the form of a Bene Gesserit test of humanity. In the test, she places a poisoned pin called a Gom Jabbar at Paul's neck and orders him to put his hand in the box. If he removes his hand, she'll prick his skin with the poison, killing him. To survive, he must resist the instinct to withdraw his hand, no matter how much it hurts, and the idea is to see if Paul's intellect can win over his base instincts. He succeeds, of course, during a tense moment with the famous "Fear is the mind killer" speech uttered by Jessica outside, but his visions are again on his mind. Like in the book, he sees and feels flesh being slowly burned away from his hand, and he sees brief flashes of Chani and the crysknife that she will eventually give him. But a lot of these visions do become clearer once he arrives on Arrakis and is surrounded by the spice. And that's where the Atreides pack up and move on to the desert planet. Arrakis is a harsh planet covered almost entirely in deserts. Because of this environment, its nickname is Dune, giving the story its title. As dangerous as the environments are the Sandworms, giant creatures which attack anything that enters their territory. Arrakis' long-settled humans take the form of the Fremen, scattered clans who fight for their survival. When the Atreides arrive, we see the Fremen chanting Al-Gaib as Paul and his family reach the base, and it heightens the sense from those around him that he might be the one prophesized. Of course, for book readers in the know, this has some big developments to it later on. Once settled in the camp though, Lady Jessica comes in contact with her new servant, Shadow Mapes, who herself is a Fremen native. She has been sent to test Jessica, and since she is a Bene Gesserit, a member of a special ancient school for women, Jessica passes the test. Jessica correctly identifies a strange knife that Mapes shows her, calling it a maker. Mapes refers to Jessica's child as the One and presents her with a crysknife. While this happens, Paul is listening to another tape about Arrakis in a different room, leading into another famous moment from the book. A small robotic probe named the Hunter Seeker appears from behind the headboard and tries to kill him, with Paul managing to escape its focus once the Shadow Mapes has finished talking to Jessica and enters the room. She distracts it and Paul crushes the device before it can reach her. In retaliation, the Atreides troops find a man beneath the palace where he had been controlling the deadly robotic probe. The Duke, rattled by the attempt on his son's life, attempts to move on with business, assigning Gurney Halleck, the War Master, to convince the spice miners of Arrakis to continue working for the Atreides. They make several plans: to infiltrate the spice smugglers' network and win their support, to prepare for the impending Harkonnen trap, and to recruit the Fremen as warriors to fight any possible threat. The Atreides also discuss Liet, the mysterious, perhaps godlike leader of the Fremen. And following Duncan Idaho's re-emergence after heading to Arrakis early, they have a meeting where Momoa's character introduces them to a Fremen leader, Stilgar, played by Javier Bardem. Duncan, the Swordmaster, has won Stilgar's respect, and the Duke, with his respectful attitude, also wins Stilgar's. Stilgar offers Duncan a place in his sietch, a protective cave, and with the Duke's blessing, Duncan agrees to join the Fremen. This is all the cultivating of desert power that the Duke was expressing to his son earlier in the film on Caladan, and another reason why the Fremen seem more interested in communicating with them. The Duke and Paul then meet Dr. Liet Kynes, the Arrakis ecologist, a climatologist for the Empire, but also a Fremen supporter. She is impressed by the Atreides despite low expectations of their character. Kynes explains the use of stillsuits, special outfits that contain the amount of moisture the body uses up, and which are able to recycle the majority of the body's moisture. As Kynes interacts more and more with Paul though, she finds that Paul oddly seems to fit the legends of the Mahdi that her people look up to, and is also surprised to find that Leto is a man who seems interested in Kynes' plans to make Arrakis an Edenic paradise. But she also is shocked in the moment when realising that Paul knows how to fit his stillsuit properly, and that further heightens her suspicion, like the fellow Fremen, that he is the one they prophesized. Following the fitting of their stillsuits, Paul, Gurney and Duke Leto join Liet Kynes and take an ornithopter out to survey spice operations, only to find themselves involved in a critical rescue operation. This scene is iconic within both the novel and Lynch's previous adaptation, given that it's the moment in which Paul realises how at home he feels on Arrakis, and yet he is also stunned by the presence of what lies in front of him. It's a moment in which Liet Kynes further realises that Paul and his father are decent, well-meaning people. And in this version, it's again iconic and probably one of the most awe-inspiring sequences I've seen in a long time. In Villeneuve's take, Paul and Gurney walk on the sand and are almost lost in the process. Before being rescued by Duke Leto, Paul inhales the spice, muttering about understanding the words of an old man, which is a reference to the religious name the Fremen give the Sandworms, Shai Hulud, that sometimes translates to Old Man of the Desert. In other words, Paul is talking about communicating with a giant worm. In the scene, the sandworm is immense, creating an unbelievably cool rippling effect as it moves through the sand, and when it eventually eats the doomed spice carryall, the worm is so massive that we barely even see the destruction it entails. After experiencing a moment close to death, and once they are back at the palace, Paul is helped by Dr. Yui to settle and begins to tell his mother of the visions he did actually have during the destruction of the spice harvester. Yui, who is desperately trying to conceal his traitorous plans from them, who also has Bene Gesserit mind abilities, is doing this because of his wife, also a Bene Gesserit, who was taken and presumably killed by the Harkonnens. They trust him a lot more in the film than the book, mainly to keep the tension building up until he reveals this. But Paul explains when discussing his visions that some are crystal clear and true to him, while others appear confusing. We of course see this when he has a vision of being stabbed with the blade he's supposed to receive from Chani, alongside another reoccurring Fremen native too, named Jamis. But even more important for the future, we get the other vision of Lady Jessica holding her unborn child, known as Liet Atreides in the book, making it tough for Paul, who is experiencing all of this. He doesn't know what dreams are true, just like the audience who sees all of them too. However, after Yui does leave the room, he does tell his mother that she's pregnant, and she reacts shocked that he would know such a thing, confirming that this is a true vision of his. Following these events with Paul on Arrakis, we then cut to a brief scene on Seleucia Secundus, the homeworld of House Corrino, where Paita accepts the Sardaukar army that will fight on Arrakis with the Harkonnens to take down the Atreides. And before we know it, the attack soon begins. Duke Leto wakes up in the middle of the night after hearing an odd sound and investigates, discovering the dead body of the Shadow Mapes before being hit by a hunter-seeker in the back that Dr. Yui set on him. Yui had also shut off the house generators and the shield, leaving the Atreides castle vulnerable to attack. However, he places a false tooth in the Duke's mouth, telling him that he has to wait till the right time to release a great poisonous gas. He feels bad that he has betrayed the Duke, so he tells him to bite down on the tooth when he is brought before Baron Harkonnen. This way, Yui can kill the Baron and avenge his wife's death, but in doing so, of course, he still feels some guilt for killing the Duke. At the same time though, he has arranged for Paul and Jessica to escape safely, and has organised Leto's ducal ring to be in the hands of Paul as sign of his true intentions for him and Jessica to survive. Sometime shortly thereafter, Jessica and Paul are proceedingly kidnapped by the Harkonnens, who fly them into the desert to kill them, but Jessica and Paul eventually use the voice on the two guards so that one kills the other. After the guards are killed, they also discover a small bundle inside the ship containing food, still suits, a letter from Dr. Yui explaining his actions and where they are headed, as well as the ducal ring that Yui organised to come to the hands of Paul. While this happens, Yui confronts Baron Harkonnen and demands to know what has happened to his wife. As he expected, the Baron has killed her, and the Baron then kills Yui himself. The Baron floats back towards Duke Leto, who gloats over his success at defeating him, and he demands to know where Jessica and Paul have fled, but the Duke does not know. The Baron threatens to torture him, but before he can even touch him, the Duke bites down on the poisoned false tooth, emitting a gas that ultimately kills Paita and all the guards in the room. But as we see leading up to the moment, the Baron activates a shield and also has a handy mud bath in store later on. Paul and Jessica are now hiding in a tent following their escape, and after ornithopters outside make them tense, they move outside to try spot it, realising that it's someone who has come to their aid. Fortunately, Duncan Idaho is piloting the ornithopter, and he helps hide Paul and Jessica, and then leaves to try and help the other surviving Atreides men. During this time, Paul is beginning to greatly change and his visions start to come to a climax. His intelligence increases, and he has become hyper-aware because of the spice he has been eating in his food. He suddenly has a prophetic dream and sees thousands of possible futures. Paul can have these prophecies because of the sudden increased power of his mind and his mentat-style training. It is not mentioned in the movie that he has mentat abilities, but what we are seeing is his brain instinctively computing possible outcomes from whatever information he has. But the visions he sees are those of Chani, her showing him the battle of a holy war, which has Paul and the Fremen in some snazzy golden armour, the crysknife, the burning of bodies in the war, and a reunion on Caladan after victory. Lady Jessica tries to calm Paul, who appears furious that her Bene Gesserit clan have made him into a freak. It's a powerful moment that follows him and his mother realising that the Duke is dead, and it's a critical turning point for the character. To symbolise this, he puts on the ducal ring, moving us into the final part of this first film. But Paul and Jessica continue to wait for Duncan Idaho's return, and when he does not arrive by nightfall, they decide to move to a new hiding place. As they leave, they see Harkonnen ornithopters blasting the surrounding area, looking for them. Paul and Jessica discover, to their relief, that Duncan and Kynes are piloting the ornithopters surrounding them, and they are taken by the ecologists to an ecological testing facility, where they discover that Kynes is also Liet, the godlike supreme leader of the Fremen. Paul and Kynes negotiate after discussing the legend of the Al-Gaib, and it's not long before the Sardaukar attack the facility. Kynes helps Jessica and Paul escape, while Duncan is tragically killed in the battle, confirming another one of Paul's early visions that he admitted to him. But Kynes leads them to an ornithopter where they can flee, and because it only seats 2, she finds another path. Kynes witnesses the Harkonnens pursue Paul and Jessica, and as she looks on in the desert to make sure they get away, she is stabbed in the back by a Sardaukar assassin. She tumbles down a sand dune and is pursued by the Sardaukar before signalling a sandworm using thumps to the ground. It emerges and swallows up both Kynes and the Sardaukar, with her final words being, "I serve only one master, his name is Shai Hulud." Paul and Jessica, however, take the ornithopter and flee their Harkonnen pursuers, flying into a sandstorm to cover their tracks, barely keeping the dragonfly-esque machine above the dangerous winds. After 4 hours of riding through it, they finally fly out and discover that the Harkonnen ornithopters are no longer pursuing them, and Paul manages to just about crash the machine in the sand as safe as he can. They exit near a large rocky area, and as they run towards the rocks, a sandworm appears, like we saw at the end of the first trailer, and it's a moment that could be their last. But Paul and Jessica trudge through the desert and just about escape the worm after Paul recognises a thumpter being used, which directs the worm away. We find out that after surviving, the duo have actually arrived at the Sietch Tabor, the same community of Fremen that Duncan Idaho and Dr. Liet Kynes previously befriended, and it was them who distracted the worm. The Atreides' encounter with Sietch Tabor definitely gets off on the wrong foot, as their leader Stilgar and his fellow warriors, in particular Jamis, who is previously seen in a lot of Paul's visions, are not especially welcoming despite Stilgar being reminded he previously met Paul and his father, Duke Leto. Jamis is a friendly character in some of his visions, but as we learn, he is actually the one who would challenge Paul to a fight to the death. This climactic scene and the visions prior to the conclusion of this fight stay in line with what Paul tells the Reverend Mother about his dreams after the Gom Jabbar test, in that things don't happen exactly as he dreams them. The detail I noticed is that Jamis appears very early on in the film. He is among the group of Fremen that Paul sees with Duncan, and most notably though, Jamis can be seen in the right corner of the screen with the Fremen behind Paul on his ship above Caladan in the vision of the Holy War period. I find this detail very cool because it establishes Jamis from very early on in the film, and his prominence in Paul's visions towards the end of the film isn't entirely out of nowhere. You may not have noticed it, but on rewatch, it is something you will definitely pick out. But tensions between the Atreides and Fremen quickly escalate. Jamis wants Stilgar to eliminate these outsiders as part of his tribal duty, but Stilgar perceives value in sparing Paul's life. But Jessica's life, not so much. And that's when things turn violent. Paul disarms Jamis while Stilgar is overwhelmed by Lady Jessica. He takes the high ground and gets the drop on the Fremen, resulting in a standoff. The fierce warrior Jamis claims this foreign boy could only have disarmed him because of Jessica's Bene Gesserit witchcraft. Jamis then invokes the Amtul rule, challenging Stilgar's leadership of their Sietch since he was bested by Jessica, and issues the Tahadi challenge. So what is this exactly? Well, it means that they will fight by combat, meaning Paul will fight Jamis as Jessica's champion, while she is forbidden from using her powers to meddle with the outcome. If Jamis wins, then he will become the new boss of the Sietch, and Paul will be dead. To make things even more unnerving for Paul, after being plagued by bewildering visions of Arrakis since the beginning of the movie, visions of an enigmatic young Fremen, a crysknife, and his death in a duel on Arrakis, these are about to be unveiled in true form. But then there is another vision, one perhaps more troubling to Paul, where he becomes a messianic figure poised to lead the Fremen in a merciless jihad against the Empire, even attacking his former homeworld, Caladan. From the high ground, Paul realises someone has had the drop on him this whole time. He turns around to finally meet the literal girl of his dreams, Zendaya's Chani, who says she would never have allowed him to hurt her friends. Moments later, as Paul preps for his duel with Jamis, Chani offers him her great aunt's crysknife, which he recognises as the same weapon from his visions. Chani tells Paul that unlike other Fremen, she doesn't believe he is the Lisan al-Gaib, their prophesied messianic figure from off-world. She also has no illusions Paul will survive a fight against a skilled fighter like Jamis, but she wants him to at least die with honour by carrying the crysknife of a great warrior. Chani adds the small comfort that Jamis won't let Paul suffer. He is a master of the crysknife, whereas Paul has only been trained in the dueling style befitting the use of defensive energy shields. The Fremen and their stillsuits have no such shields. But while Jamis is indeed a fearsome fighter, once the fight begins, Paul soon gains the upper hand and immobilises him, urging to yield. But with the Fremen, this is also not an option. This is a fight to the death scenario, and Paul's reluctance to slay his opponent is initially perceived as cruelly toying with him. So Paul does what he must, reversing what happened in his future visions, and kills Jamis. With that, the boy has become a man in the eyes of the Fremen, who each give him a pat on the shoulder as a sign that Paul and his mother have been accepted among them. Jessica also reveals to Stilgar that Paul has never killed before. He takes the name of Paul Muad'Dib, and in the books, he is also given a nickname Usul that the Fremen will only use among themselves, while Lady Jessica goes by the Fremen term Sayadina, meaning a low-ranking priestess. So what does this mean for Paul's previously envisioned death? What was the meaning behind it? Simply put, Paul Atreides had to die in order for Paul Muad'Dib to live. Paul's victory also means his vision of him becoming a warmongering messiah for the Fremen could come true. His fear that this may be his inescapable fate weighs heavily on him throughout the latter part of the novel, although it's largely left up to Chalamet's nuanced performance in the film to suggest the dread he feels about his possible future. It's very interesting, and I will be doing a video later this week talking about why I think this ending is perfect for this first part, setting up the events and also feeling like the ending to Paul Atreides' character, with him now becoming something else. But the movie does end on a brief moment of hope as the Fremen journey back across the dunes to their home with the body of Jamis in tow. Chani turns to Paul and smiles, reminiscent of a bright image he has seen in his dreams, and assures him this is only the beginning. We see a brief shot of a Fremen native riding a sandworm alongside them, and that's how Dune Part 1 ends. But that was my video explaining the plot and ending for Denis Villeneuve's Dune. Like I said in my spoiler-free review last week, this film is a staggering achievement when it comes to science fiction adaptations, and even with this first part alone, there's going to be plenty to talk about in regards to the quality of the film, the Dune lore, and themes within the filmmaking. But I do hope this breakdown did help some of you guys understand the events and smaller details of this first part a bit better, and overall, I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the film, so don't forget to let me know down below in the comment section. I will also be doing multiple video essays this week, including my analysis of the ending more thoroughly, and a commentary on why I think Denis Villeneuve's Dune is a modern masterpiece. So keep a lookout for whenever I post, and make sure you don't miss any of it. For more breakdown and topical videos on Dune 2021, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.